She was my best friend's mother. Elegant, untouchable, and far beyond the world I knew. But one night, under the hush of rain and regret, she looked at me with trembling eyes and whispered, "You're too young to refuse me." And in that moment, I realized age wasn't the line we were crossing. It was fear. I hadn't been back to that street in years, the narrow road lined with old jacaranda trees, their petals scattered like lilac confetti across the cracked pavement. Everything looked smaller now. The houses, the fences, even the sky. I parked in front of the same porch I used to run up as a teenager, heart thudding like it always did before my friend's mom answered the door. When she did, the years folded in on themselves. Her smile was the same, soft, a little knowing, but there was something new behind her eyes. Time had gentled her, not diminished her. Her hair was shorter now, with a streak of silver that somehow made her more striking. She wore a cream blouse, sleeves rolled to her elbows, and the faint scent of vanilla drifted toward me as she leaned against the doorway. "Look at you," she said, her voice carrying that same calm warmth. "You've grown into someone your mother would brag about." I laughed, a little awkward, feeling 16 again. "And you haven't changed at all." It was a lie, but not the kind that hurts. Inside, the house felt like memory. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the kitchen clock, even the way sunlight fell through the same lace curtains. I caught myself glancing at the framed photos on the wall, her son, a family frozen in simpler times. We sat in the living room, mugs of coffee between us, conversation flowing easily at first. She asked about work, life, whether I was seeing anyone. I asked how she'd been since the divorce, the one my friend had mentioned so casually over text months ago. Her smile faltered for the first time. "Some days are quiet," she said after a pause. "And some are too quiet." I didn't know what to say, so I nodded, the silence filling with unspoken things. She looked out the window for a moment, the light catching the curve of her cheek. There was a softness to her loneliness. Not desperation, but something deeper, something dignified. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door. The evening air was warm, carrying the scent of rain far off in the distance. "It was good to see you," I said. "You too," she replied, and then hesitated. "You've changed, you know. You listen differently now." I didn't know what she meant, but the way she said it made my chest tighten. For a heartbeat, her gaze lingered, curious, unreadable. Then she smiled again, gently, as if pulling the moment back before it could turn into something else. I stepped into the fading daylight, but part of me stayed behind in that quiet house, caught somewhere between memory and something new. I didn't realize it yet, but that glance, that tiny flicker of recognition, was the beginning of everything that would follow. The next morning, I woke to a text from my old friend. "Man, I have to leave for a week. Emergency at work. My mom will look after you. Just stay there. She won't mind." I thought about leaving anyway, not wanting to impose. But when I mentioned it to her over breakfast, she shook her head gently, setting down her mug with that composed grace she always carried. "Don't be ridiculous," she said. "It's been years since this house had company that actually talks. Stay. At least until the weekend." Her tone left no room for argument, kind, but certain. I agreed, though part of me wasn't sure if it was politeness or curiosity that kept me there. The house felt different without my friend around. It breathed slower, quieter. The ticking clock became louder. The walls seemed to listen. During the day, she moved through rooms like a melody I almost remembered, humming softly while she cooked, watering her plants by the kitchen window, her fingers brushing soil off the leaves. Every small thing about her drew attention without asking for it. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear while reading, the faint crease between her brows when she tried to remember where she'd left her glasses, the sound of her bare feet crossing the wooden floor late at night, just outside my room. That first evening, she made pasta simple but somehow perfect. She poured 2 glasses of wine and sat across from me at the small oak table. "You know," she said after a while, smiling faintly, "you used to eat here every Friday. You and Daniel would leave a trail of crumbs all the way to the TV." I grinned. We were hungry kids. She tilted her head. No, you were gentle kids. You always offered to help me wash the dishes. The only one who did. Her eyes lingered on me just long enough for my breath to catch. Then she looked away, sipping her wine. The silence wasn't awkward. It was thick, like warmth trapped between words. When she laughed again, it was softer this time, a little freer, and I realized she hadn't done that, really laughed, since I'd arrived. After dinner, I offered to clear the table. Our hands brushed as I reached for her glass, and she didn't pull away immediately. Her fingers were cool against mine, the faintest tremor there before she let go. "Thank you," she said, her voice low. I nodded, pretending it was nothing. But later, in my room, I could still feel that touch echoing through me. Small, almost accidental, yet impossible to forget. Before turning out the light, I heard her humming again down the hallway. Something about it made me smile, not because it was perfect, but because it felt alive. That night, lying in the guest room with the sound of her voice fading into the quiet, I realized how strange it felt, how right it felt to be staying. It began with thunder. Not loud, not sudden. Just a low, rolling sound that drifted through the evening air, carrying the smell of coming rain. I was reading in the guest room when I heard her footsteps in the hallway, soft and unhurried. Then the faint click of the balcony door opening. Curiosity won over hesitation. I found her there, leaning on the railing with a glass of red wine, her hair lifted slightly by the wind. The first raindrops had just begun to fall, tapping gently against the railing. She turned when she heard me, eyes catching the dim amber light spilling from the living room behind us. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. I shook my head. I like the sound of rain," she said, smiling faintly. "It makes the house feel less empty." The air was cool and smelled of wet earth. I stepped beside her, careful not to stand too close, though I could already feel the warmth radiating from her body. The silence between us wasn't awkward anymore. It had weight, rhythm, a quiet pulse of its own. Lightning flickered in the distance, and for a second, I saw her face in full, the soft curve of her cheek, the silver in her hair glinting under the flash. She wasn't made for perfection. She was made for depth. Every line, every faint crease told a story. She caught me looking, and instead of looking away, she held my gaze. "You always were observant," she said softly. "Daniel used to say you notice things other people miss. Maybe I just pay attention to what matters," I replied before I could stop myself. Her smile faltered, not in offense, but in thought. She turned back toward the rain, setting her glass down. The sound of water on metal filled the silence. When a gust of wind blew across the balcony, she shivered slightly. Without thinking, I offered my hoodie. She hesitated, then slipped it on, her hands brushing against mine as she pulled the sleeves up. It was a small thing, but it sent a quiet tremor through the air. "Thank you," she whispered. The rain grew heavier, a steady rhythm that drowned the world beyond us. We stood there like that, two silhouettes framed by lightning and the scent of storm. Her shoulder brushed against mine once, lightly, and she didn't move away. For a moment, I thought of all the reasons this shouldn't mean anything. Age, friendship, history. But they dissolved under the simplicity of that quiet closeness. Then she spoke again, voice barely above the rain. "It's strange how silence feels safer with you than words do." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The rain said enough for both of us. We stayed there until the storm passed, neither of us moving, as if afraid that stepping away might break whatever fragile thread had started weaving between us. When she finally turned to go inside, she looked back once. A small glance, soft, uncertain. And in that look, I felt everything we hadn't yet said. Morning came slow, softened by the hush that follows a long night of rain. The world outside looked washed clean, the garden glistening, the air cool enough to carry the faint smell of wet earth through the open windows. I followed the scent of coffee to the kitchen, half awake, barefoot on the cold tiles. She was already there, a loose robe tied at the waist, her hair still damp from a shower, strands falling over her cheek as she poured water into the French press. Sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, wrapping her in gold. She looked nothing like the woman who had carried herself with such careful composure the night before. In that morning light, she seemed softer, almost fragile. Not the mother of my friend. Not the woman who had lived through heartbreak, but someone just human. I hesitated at the doorway, not wanting to intrude. She turned, startled for a moment, then smiled, small, tired, but real. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. I shook my head. "I kept thinking about the storm." She nodded. "It's strange, isn't it? How something loud can make everything inside feel quiet." I moved closer, taking a seat at the kitchen island. The sound of the coffee press filled the silence. She set a mug in front of me, her fingers brushing my wrist just briefly. A featherlight touch that left more warmth than it should have. We talked about nothing and everything. Work, books, her garden. Her laugh came easier now, though every so often, her gaze would drift. Not distant, but inward, as if she were remembering something she wasn't ready to share. Then, as I took another sip of coffee, I said it, quietly, without thinking, "You seem lonely sometimes." The words hung between us. She froze, her eyes flicking to mine. For a heartbeat, I wished I could take it back. But then she exhaled slowly, setting her cup down. "I am," she said simply. "It's not something I admit often." Her voice trembled, not with weakness, but with the weight of being honest. "When you get older," she went on, "people stop seeing you. They see your past, your mistakes, your title, someone's mother, someone's ex, but not you." I didn't interrupt. I just listened. And when she finally met my eyes, there was a kind of rawness there I hadn't seen before. "I'm sorry," I murmured. "You deserve to be seen." That's when she stepped closer, slow, deliberate, as if testing the air between us. Her hand came to rest on the edge of the counter beside mine. I could feel her warmth, smell the faint trace of her perfume. Her eyes searched mine, uncertain but brave. And then, in a voice barely louder than the hum of the refrigerator, she whispered, "You're too young to refuse me." The words weren't a demand. They were a confession, trembling at the edges. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was charged, alive. I didn't move, didn't answer. I just watched the rise and fall of her breath, the flicker of fear and longing in her eyes. Then she turned away, slowly, gracefully, as if pulling herself back from something dangerous. "Drink your coffee," she said softly, and left the room. But the echo of her whisper stayed with me, humming beneath my skin long after she was gone. The house felt heavier after that morning, as if her whisper had changed the air itself. Every sound carried more meaning now. The creak of the stairs, the soft closing of a door, the clink of her spoon against a mug. I moved through the day quietly, unsure how to exist in a space that suddenly felt too intimate, too charged. I told myself it hadn't meant anything, that maybe she regretted saying it, that maybe I'd imagined the tremor in her voice. But memory is cruel that way. It replays the smallest things, the warmth of her breath, the look in her eyes, until they don't feel like memories anymore. They feel like possibilities. When I finally saw her again, it was late afternoon. She was outside, trimming a rosebush near the fence, hair pulled back, her robe replaced by a light blouse and jeans. The sun painted her skin in gold, and for a second, I almost forgot how to breathe. She noticed me watching and smiled, polite but distant, a smile built for pretending. "Could you hand me the shears?" I did. Our fingers touched, just barely, and she didn't flinch, but she didn't meet my eyes either. We spent the next hour tending the garden in silence. The scent of roses mixed with soil and summer heat. Every now and then, she'd say something ordinary, "Water that one," or "Watch the thorns." But beneath her calm tone, I could feel it, the same quiet confusion I carried. Later, inside, she was in the kitchen preparing dinner. I lingered by the doorway again, unsure whether to speak or retreat. Finally, I said, "About this morning." She froze. The knife in her hand paused above the cutting board. For a long moment, she didn't look up. Then she exhaled, set the knife down, and turned to face me. "I shouldn't have said that," she said softly. "It wasn't fair." Her voice wavered just slightly, and that made it worse. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that I understood. That part of me hadn't stopped thinking about it since. But I didn't. I just nodded. "I get it," I said. "You don't have to explain." But she shook her head. "You do get it, though. That's the problem." I stepped closer without meaning to. She didn't move away this time. Her eyes lifted to mine, full of something between guilt and longing. "You make me forget how alone I am," she whispered. "And that scares me." For a heartbeat, the room seemed to shrink. I could hear her breathing, slow and uneven. My hand brushed against the counter near hers. Not a touch, but close enough to feel the warmth between us. "I don't want to be something you regret," I said quietly. Her gaze softened, glistening at the edges. She reached out, just once, fingertips grazing the back of my hand. It wasn't a gesture of seduction. It was gratitude, apology, and confusion all at once. "Neither do I," she said. Then she turned away, her voice steady again. "Dinner will be ready soon." I stood there long after she left, my heart caught between wanting her and wishing I didn't. That night, lying awake, I could still hear her words echoing through the dark. "You make me forget how alone I am." And for the first time, I didn't know if that was something to be proud of or something to fear. The following evening carried the kind of stillness that only comes after a long stretch of rain. Clean, quiet, waiting. I found her in the garden again, kneeling by the lavender plants as the light faded to gold. The air smelled of damp soil and something faintly sweet, like the world was trying to start over. She didn't look up when she heard me approach. "You're leaving tomorrow, right?" I nodded, though part of me wasn't sure I meant it. "Yeah. Early morning." She hummed softly, more to herself than to me. "That's good." But her tone didn't match her words. For a while I just watched her. The hem of her dress brushed against the grass. Her hands moved with quiet care, clipping away the dead stems. Everything about her, her stillness, her restraint, made it harder to breathe. "You're angry with me," I said finally. She shook her head. "No, I'm angry with myself. I forgot what it feels like to want something I shouldn't." The confession hung in the air, fragile and raw. I stepped closer, close enough to smell the faint trace of her perfume mingling with lavender and rain. "I don't think this is wrong," I said softly. "Maybe complicated, maybe impossible, but not wrong." She finally turned to look at me. There was no defensiveness in her expression this time, only exhaustion and truth. "You're young," she whispered. "You think honesty fixes everything. It doesn't. Sometimes it just makes you ache more." "I can live with the ache," I said, "as long as it's real." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, with a quiet sigh, she rose to her feet. The sun was low enough now that the sky looked painted, streaks of rose and amber fading into dusk. She brushed dirt from her palms, then looked at me again, softer now. "Do you know what scared me most?" she asked. "Not that you might feel something for me, but that I might feel it back." I didn't answer. I just watched as she stepped closer, until we were standing almost toe to toe. Her hand found my arm. Tentative at first, then firmer, her fingers resting against the fabric of my sleeve. "I don't know what this means," she murmured. "I don't know what happens after tonight." "Maybe we don't need to," I said. She smiled faintly at that, a sad kind of smile that still reached her eyes. Then she rested her forehead against my chest. A quiet surrender, full of both apology and relief. I could feel her heartbeat, quick and uneven. I didn't move, didn't speak. I just let the moment be what it was. Fragile, unpromised, honest. After a while, she whispered, "Maybe what matters isn't age, it's timing." The light faded completely then, leaving only the sound of the wind moving through the garden and the warmth of her leaning against me. Neither of us tried to name what was happening. Some truths, I think, don't need words, they just need a moment brave enough to exist. Morning arrived in pale gold and quiet. The rain had washed everything clean, the trees, the air, even the sky. I woke before the sun was fully up, the kind of still hour when the world feels half asleep and you can hear your own heartbeat if you listen closely. My bag was already packed by the door. Leaving should have been simple, but nothing between us had been simple since that morning in the kitchen. I found her in the living room, sitting on the couch with a mug of coffee between her hands. She looked calm, too calm, like someone who had been up for hours rehearsing the kind of peace she didn't feel. "You're leaving early," she said. I nodded. "Long drive ahead." She smiled a little, not quite meeting my eyes. "That's good. It's easier that way." Her words were light, but her fingers tightened around the mug. The air between us felt fragile, like glass, beautiful and dangerous to touch. I sat down across from her. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Outside, the world carried on. Birds, wind, the distant hum of traffic. All the ordinary sounds that felt painfully at odds with how heavy this goodbye felt. "I don't know what to say," I admitted quietly. "Then don't," she replied. "Some things are better left unwrapped. They stay whole that way." But then she looked at me, really looked, and something in her eyes cracked through the composure. She set her mug aside and stood, crossing the space between us. When she reached me, she hesitated for half a breath before pulling me into a hug. It wasn't rushed or desperate. It was slow, deliberate, the kind of embrace that says everything words can't. Her cheek rested against my shoulder, warm and steady. I could feel the rise and fall of her breath, the faint tremor beneath it. She smelled of coffee and rain and something faintly floral. I closed my eyes and let the moment sink in. "Thank you," she whispered, "for listening, for reminding me I'm still seen." I wanted to tell her that she had been more than seen, that she had changed something in me I couldn't name. But I didn't. I just nodded, my hand brushing lightly against her back. When she finally stepped away, her eyes were bright, though she smiled through it. "Drive safe," she said. "I will." At the door, I paused, one last look at the house, the morning light spilling through the curtains, the faint trace of her standing there in the glow. It all felt like a memory forming in real time. "Will I see you again?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Then, with that same quiet grace she always carried, she said, "Maybe not, but you'll remember me. That's enough." And somehow it was. As I drove away, the town fading in the rearview mirror, I realized love isn't always meant to last. Sometimes it's meant to awaken. What we shared wasn't about forever. It was about being seen, being understood, even just once. The road stretched ahead, open and endless, but my heart carried her still. Not as a wound, not as a regret, but as something warm I'd keep quietly for the rest of my life. If this story touched you, even for a moment, take a breath before you scroll. Because sometimes, the quietest connections leave the deepest marks. If you felt that too, red heart like this video to show your support. Speech balloon, share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in his place? And bell subscribe for more slow burn age gap romances that remind us how love isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's just real. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and keep believing in quiet love.